In the meantime, I want to turn it over to Joe Henke, who is in our other studio with criminal defense attorney Daryl Cohen, to weigh in on this case and also the jury's verdict. Joe?
Joining us here, former prosecutor, now defense attorney. You've been on both sides of the courtroom here. One distinction being made between the defendants already is the malice murder charge. Everyone is found guilty of murder here, but only Travis McMichael found guilty of malice murder. We're waiting to hear when sentencing will take place, but does that sort of differentiate their cases moving forward here of how they're handled now?
No, I think he was found guilty of malice murder because he pulled the trigger. He had the weapon, he had the gun. But as far as changing the time or distinguishing between when the sentences will come down, I don't think that's going to make a difference. I think a judge is going to sentence them all at or about the same time.
Sentence them all together, but does it change anything in their sentencing as far as under Georgia law, their eligibility for parole or the sentences they receive?
Major, or maybe not. With malice murder, you are not eligible for parole, period. End of discussion. So unless it's reversed on appeal, and I don't see that happening, then he is going to spend the rest of his life in prison. Whereas the other two defendants, where they were convicted of felony murder, they're eligible for parole in about 7 years. Will they make parole? The average person who is incarcerated, who makes parole, spends somewhere between 25 and 26 years in prison. So it may not make a difference, but at least they have some shot of being released at some point in their life.
There was a lot in the buildup to this case of race and the role it will play. When this actually got to a courtroom, we saw very little discussed of race in this case. Of course, there was mentioning 11 white jurors, 1 black juror. The prosecution really didn't bring race into the courtroom. But now there's federal hate crime charges. That case is still pending. Do federal prosecutors, bring this conviction into the courtroom? Do they have to present a much different case because of the hate crime charges?
Well, I think the hate crime charges federally are done as a backup in case one or more of these defendants were acquitted. I think that they have those hate charges crimes to prosecute later. But because it has already been adjudicated, because the 3 of them have been convicted, I wouldn't be surprised if the Fed said, you know what, we're not going to prosecute them. Because the reality is, how much more time can they get? You can't get more time than you're alive. But they may do it because they think it's appropriate, and they're trying to send a message to the rest of this country, you can't do what these 3 people did.
What, as a former prosecutor, were you surprised that they were able to get murder convictions on all 3? The state, when they presented their case, almost presented 3 cases in one. You had Travis McMichael, the gunman who pulled the trigger. You had Greg McMichael, who you could say instigated the situation from notifying Travis, hey, get your gun, this guy's running. And then you had Roddy Bryan, the guy who was in his truck. State said that was a weapon by itself, but he's on the cell phone recording video of this. You sort of have 3 distinct roles there. Are you surprised they got murder on all 3 of them?
I'm a little surprised that they got murder on Roddy Bryan. I think that he had a viable defense for the murder charge. And had he had a different type of defense, perhaps it would have worked. But you never know. It's the old story. If you win, you're the greatest there ever was. If you lose, you're the worst. I think he could have easily been acquitted of that charge, not of the other charges.
And any other cases come to mind in Georgia here of, even before this went to a courtroom, we saw it impact the state's citizens arrest law. Citizens arrest was a cornerstone or the crux of the defense's argument here. And that law was changed, overhauled in the state of Georgia before the conviction even happened, before it entered a courtroom. Have you ever seen a case like that before in Georgia?
Well, Joe, it's not a citizen's arrest if the person who was to be arrested wasn't committing a felony in the presence of these people. And even if Ahmaud Arbery had committed a crime of criminal trespass, that's not citizen's arrest. So that was arguable, but not real. And I think there's a very big difference between what you try to tell a jury and what a jury believes. And this jury cut through it. They cut through everything. They focused very carefully on what happened in the courtroom, and I think the video was extraordinarily important.
And it seems like the jury went along with that thought process. That's what the state said in their closing arguments, that these defendants did not see a crime in action. They had no evidence of it. You can't make a citizen's arrest. That the state law at that time for citizen's arrest would not allow for that. And seems like the jury followed along with that. Last question here, does any analysis, your thoughts on the defense, the case they presented, the state, the case they presented, any problems that you had with anything that they presented? Sort of what's your analysis of it?
Well, again, because they lost, they were wrong. I think they could have changed the way they defended these people. Frankly, I would have tried to have a plea deal worked out in advance of this trial, because there were only two things that could have happened. Either A, a conviction on almost or all of the counts, or B, a not guilty. Not guilty was very unlikely, even though the narrative from the rest of this country was, we're the South and it's redneck and it's racist. Well, this jury ignored everything. This jury ignored everything they should have ignored, and they focused on the evidence and the lack of evidence, and I think they focused mostly on the video, which said it all.
Perfect. Daryl, appreciate your time as always. Daryl Cohen, former prosecutor, now defense attorney. Sheba, will send it back to you.